Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Sports Speak right before 4th of July weekend. I'm Eddie Kalegi.
And I'm Tim Moore.
Exciting today, and you know what? We're actually going to talk about some sports coming up this weekend. We're in the month of July now, and hopefully a lot of the major sports will be returning at the end of the month, but there are actually some sporting events this weekend we will get to. But before that, last episode we started talking about Cam Newton, and it diverged into this entire AFC preview. So we might as well start talking NFC football today. And Tim, of course, the top story in the NFC has to be the NFC South, with Tom Brady going to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, Drew Brees still in New Orleans, Teddy Bridgewater now the quarterback of the Panthers, and the Falcons standing pat with Matt Ryan. That's going to be a very exciting division to watch this year.
Yeah, the NFC South has so many good quarterbacks. I mean, when you look at, again, Tom Brady, you look at the Saints side with Drew Brees, Matt Ryan, who still can sling a football, even though he doesn't have a good team around him at times in terms of the defense, that is. And then, you look around the rest of the NFC. The NFC East is a bunch of underrated quarterbacks, in my opinion. They're going to have to be the underdogs this year. I mean, you have Carson Wentz, Dak Prescott, Daniel Jones, and Dwayne Haskins, who has to do a lot of proving. On the NFC West side, can Jared Goff be consistent? That's the question. Can he be a leader to help a Rams team, which, by the way, is depleted because they couldn't afford a roster? And by the way, Eddie, makes me want to think one thing. We're seeing success right now for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, but like the Kansas City Chiefs, eventually that'll come across an issue where you can't pay everyone. Do you think this is going to be a scenario for the Buccaneers? Because we've seen it happen to the Rams and also soon to be the Cleveland Browns.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a possibility. You've got two really young receivers in Evans and Godwin that are becoming top 10 receivers in the whole NFL, and they're both going to be – they're young, so they're going to get being paid soon. We don't know how long Tom Brady's going to be there. We know he's deep into his years, but, it's Tom versus time. Who knows how long he could go on for. So you wonder if he'll go past this deal, which would seem unprecedented in the NFL because he'd be going up on 45 years old. But with Tom Brady, it seems like anything's possible. And what about Gronkowski, too, if he wants to continue playing? And you've got a lot of solid defensive players in Tampa Bay, too. And, I was actually watching First Take. You bring up the money issue. It kind of connects. They were talking about the Kansas City Chiefs because when Patrick Mahomes has to be paid, I can't even imagine how much he's going to get with how good he's been these last 3 years. And you've got so many other young guys around that same age, Tyreek Hill, Travis Kelce. Their best defensive player, Chris Jones, they had to franchise tag him because they had nothing else to do. And he's actually rumored on Twitter about potentially, he quoted Le'Veon Bell a couple of times about how he might pull that stunt and not even play this season because of the franchise tag and given all the other circumstances with COVID and social injustice and everything. So I think Tampa Bay might end up following that route. But I do want to talk about the NFC East as well because Dak Prescott's another guy who got that franchise tag. He's probably not too happy that a long-term deal has not gotten done. They have until July 15th to complete that. But Dallas is still going to be a good team. Philadelphia, I'm an Eagles fan, and I do not have that much faith in Carson Wentz. Once again, getting hurt in a playoff game, and they had to turn to Josh McCown. And the fact that they held on and almost beat Seattle with Josh McCown, I think, was pretty impressive. But still, Nick Foles won that Super Bowl for that team. Carson Wentz got them to the playoffs. Nick Foles was the person who won that Super Bowl. I do not think Carson Wentz would have beaten the Patriots that year in that Super Bowl. But I just have this feeling that the NFC East is going to be very competitive. Not one team is really going to jump out ahead of anyone. I think Dallas has the best roster of the four teams, but the other thing, too, is the Eagles have a very solid roster, but these last 2 years, they have been hurt by injuries more than any other team. So if they can avoid the injury bug, and also getting Jalen Hurts in the draft was very interesting, and I wonder if they try to use him. He's a mobile quarterback. If they use him in sort of a Taysom Hill role, we've heard people talking about that. The Packers have even been rumored to do that with Jordan Love. So I don't know how exactly that would work, but that's something interesting. And you mentioned the Redskins have so much to prove. Now you've got your big defensive leader in Chase Young. Year 2 of Dwayne Haskins. So many young guys. Darius Geis will probably be coming back from injury. I mean, you've got a lot of talented players in that Redskins team, but they're young. This is an opportunity for them. And lastly, the Giants, Daniel Jones coming back year 2. I mean, I don't know. I don't know how to really put it with Daniel Jones because I think he was solid. He wasn't great, but compared to how people were just so upset on draft night with the selection by Dave Gettleman of Daniel Jones, I think he's exceeded at least those expectations. He's not a world beater, he's not a superstar, but I think he's deserving that sixth pick compared to what other people thought. And I compare it kind of like Kristaps Porzingis when he was with the Knicks, when people were like, "Who?" and he got picked. And I mean, he was solid for them, and now he's moved on to the Mavericks. But focusing back on the gridiron, I think Daniel Jones has a lot to prove and a lot to grow in year two. And same with Dwayne Haskins, which is going to make the NFC East really exciting from top to bottom.
Well, it's funny because you mentioned NFC East, and obviously you being an Eagles fan, I despise you for that regard because I am a Giants fan. But, in that aspect, you mentioned it's so even. And I do want to mention one thing, which we actually, believe it or not, haven't mentioned early on yet. The NFL is reducing its preseason to 2 games this year. So the only reason why I say that is because four weeks of a preseason in terms of games allows you some time to gather yourself, get back into momentum, almost like a baseball preseason. But with 2 games, now there's going to be heavy emphasis of getting your starters reps, getting guys going. So if you have players that don't find their rhythm early on in the season, you may not have a good year to start. And in the NFC East, this tends to be more of an impactor than most teams, I would say, because last year, looked at it, the Giants went 3-1 in the preseason. They were clicking, and they looked to be very good, but they weren't utilizing their starters until week 4, and then the Giants struggled and barely picked up wins. The Eagles, when they got their starters going in the preseason, they clicked immediately. And then you saw it transition to the regular season. Same thing as well with the Dallas Cowboys. The Redskins were kind of in between because they still didn't even know who was going to play quarterback at that point. And obviously, we know Dwayne Haskins ends up prevailing down the road. But I think you're going to start seeing that scenario again, and particularly, again, with 2 games in a preseason. It's going to be those teams that we see, I think, click quickly, assuming that starters are going to get reps early on to come out and prevail. But I really don't know, Eddie. I'm being honest, I don't know. I would like to imagine this is a year for the Dallas Cowboys to, win the NFC East Championship and move on. But Philadelphia did address their issues. They needed a better secondary considering all those injuries as well. And they address their issues that they need to. Again, the Eagles as well have a couple of cap issues, but they're doing a good job, going through that. The Giants, they answered their biggest issue in terms of solo tackling. They went out, got a couple middle linebackers. They needed some, extra DBs, drafted a few, and going after a big signing. They still need an edge rusher. They'll find that, but the Giants addressed their defense. I'm confident in the O-line around Daniel Jones. I think that offense didn't need to be touched. It's a matter of, is Evan Ingram healthy, and will Sterling Shepard be the receiver the Giants need? Because remember, they signed him to a deal in which that he was expected to be the number 1 guy, making over 100, I think it's 112 million on a 5-year extension. He's never been a number 1 type receiver, but he's going to have to surpass expectations, especially with an aging Golden Tate. I mean, again, I don't know if the Giants could be surprised this year. As a Giants fan, I'm optimistic, but with Dave Gettleman as GM, I don't know. At this point, I'm complacent with a 5-11 year. So I think this is a Cowboys, Eagles type year. I don't really know what to expect with the Redskins, to be honest, either. If their defense is uninjured and they're good, they could be competing for a title, but I just don't think the Redskins are ready at the same time, because you have so many mysteries on that offense. Don't get me wrong, Darius Geis is awesome, he's young, but they've been getting carried by Adrian Peterson now. Mm-hmm. So, and AP's getting older. Their wide receivers barely have hands. So I don't really know what to expect.
And I feel like the Redskins, Giants, and Eagles are all in a similar boat, that they all have young guys. They also have dealt with injuries that they kind of want to get to mesh together. With the Cowboys, they have the roster. They have the coach in Mike McCarthy. The question is, can they just get it to all mesh together? And I want to go back to your preseason thing because that was something just mentioned yesterday, that there will be just 2 preseason games. It'll start the weekend of the 21st, I believe, of August this year. But I do want to say one thing. I like the decision to have 2 preseason games. I don't know if you agree with that, but you mentioned how the Giants, it started not working when they weren't using their starters. Well, the reason the starters don't play at the beginning of the preseason, well, there's 2 reasons. First off, because they want to decide who's going to make the roster and who doesn't, and that takes precedent when you got to figure out the full 53-man roster. And second of all, we have seen time and time again guys getting injured early in the preseason. Cam Newton was one of those guys with the Panthers last year, playing in a preseason game a bit too long. These teams are very tentative because we know how many injuries there are in the game of football, and you do not want to lose someone for the important part of the season before games actually get started, especially when you know they're going to be a key piece. It's not a competition to get their position. You know they're going to be a starter. So I think that this 2-game preseason, it still gives the teams enough time, because you know what? A lot of these decisions about who's going to start, who's going to be on the roster are made in camp anyway. You've got all these days of training camp. And also, I mean, the prospect of injuries is so much lower, and you have to play your starters even less. And you know what? If you wanted to treat the second game more so like a regular game and play those starters a little more, okay, but at least it's just one game instead of trying to fit them in to that first series so you can have them on the field so all the fans are excited to see them in one series in early August and risk injury. I think this could be good in the long run. But heading back to the NFC, we've talked about the South, we've talked about the East. I want to bring up the NFC West. You mentioned Jared Goff, and he's been streaky. And the Rams, no more Todd Gurley. I know he didn't have a great year last year, but they've had to make some roster changes. You've got your defending NFC champion San Francisco 49ers returning many of the same tools. Jimmy Garoppolo, another year on his career. With Seattle, I mean, I think they're going to be very solid. I know there's been all kinds of talks about Antonio Brown. Did you see he and Russell Wilson were actually working out together the other day? So I wonder if Pete Carroll might try to make that move. And honestly, I think if any team could fit Antonio Brown in, I think Seattle would be a team that could handle that, because he cannot fit on a team where there's a lot of already passionate, clashing personalities. We saw that in Oakland with Gruden and that whole squad, and Vontez Perfect. And we saw that in New England as well, because, you know, you can't act up in front of Coach Belichick. But I think Seattle could be a place for him. But even without him, the Seahawks are going to bring back some running backs that got hurt last year. They've still got Russell Wilson. They've still got a solid defense. They've got some new guys back there, but they've still got a very solid defense. And think about it. They came 1 yard short of winning the NFC West last year in that Sunday night game. So they had just as much of a chance as San Francisco, really, to make that Super Bowl. So I think they're going to come back strong. And don't count out the Arizona Cardinals either. Kyler Murray, I think, is going to have a really good second year. He had a nice rookie year, kind of flew below the radar. They bring in DeAndre Hopkins. Him, Larry Fitzgerald. I mean, you've had so many nice targets for Arizona in the past, and I think Kyler Murray can really take advantage of having Hopkins. Losing David Johnson, I don't think is that big of a blow, because, I mean, frankly, David Johnson has been very overrated these past couple of years and has been really tagged with injuries throughout. But I think the NFC West should also be fun to watch. I think the Rams are going to be the team that really slips back. So, Tim, I've got to ask you, and I mean, you can get into the NFC North as well, but I'm going to ask you that same question that we talked about on Monday. What NFC team do you think could fly under the radar and be a surprise? And which one do you think is going to be a disappointment?
Well, the easy answer was the Cardinals. I was about to say, the Arizona Cardinals, I think, are a team this year to be scared of. I think this is going to be the team that doesn't just win the NFC West, but gives the 49ers a run for their money. Now, don't get me wrong. The 49ers are a very good team, very good defense, great running game. But like how I mentioned, Eddie, about the Baltimore Ravens, when you don't make changes, you're not getting better. And the 49ers team did not make many changes. And guess what? That team didn't get better. If anything, it regresses or stays the same. So I'm excited to see with the changes in Arizona. You mentioned Larry Fitzgerald, DeAndre Hopkins. I mean, we talk about DeAndre, being perhaps maybe the best receiver in the game. That's still up for debate. but he gets Kyler Murray, who's a mobile quarterback. And to be honest, if you ever go back and look over the years throughout the Texans, DeAndre Hopkins with a semi-mobile quarterback, obviously I know he's had Watson recently, but with a semi-mobile quarterback, his receiving numbers actually tend to go up because he's really good as well breaking free from defensive backs on longer plays compared to a regular quarterback, may sit back, drop back, and not be able to extend the play a little bit. But and then you have Larry Fitzgerald. Fitz has been the main target for Arizona for a good little while. Him falling to a number 2 or 3 role, obviously getting up there in age is huge, but he's aiming for a record. That's Larry Fitzgerald's goal right now. He wants to get to that record, and I'm really excited to see Fitz be out there and have another bit of help. Also, you mentioned the running back situation for Arizona. Sure, you lose David Johnson, but he's been plagued with injuries. You can fill anyone, I feel, in that running back role because Kyler Murray can still run,
Mm-hmm.
He has the capabilities, but you can fill anyone there, and you can make this a team that's a threat. Add on a very good defense, as Arizona's always known for, and you have a good combo. Now, in regards to the rest of the West, I'm not saying San Francisco is not a playoff team. This is a wild card team. In fact, I'm going to say this. I think you see both NFC wild cards next year come from the West. Because I'm not going to count out the Seahawks. The Seahawks are always a playoff team every year. Pete Carroll knows what he's doing. And you mentioned AB potentially to Seattle. My bet is actually the opposite end. Now, we know Josh Gordon, for example. He went to Seattle. Pete Carroll took a chance on him. I think Tom Brady gets Antonio Brown. That's another story and debate for later. But Seattle, and let's say if you get AB, that's huge regardless. But that's a team that is still very good. Even now they're going through change. They have a bunch of youthful, good defensive players. They'll be right there in a wild card spot. But other than that, I don't really see, much going on for the Rams. I see them struggling this year. I think they go 4-12, to be honest. I don't really see them winning games. I've never seen the Rams really as a good team. They were surprising for 2 years when they made the big trades, but they don't really have anything now.
I mean, I don't know if I'd go as far as putting the Rams 4-12, but I do agree that they're well behind the other teams in the NFC West, especially with the Cardinals on the rise. I don't think we're going to get 3 teams from the West. I still think we're going to see both New Orleans and Tampa Bay out of the South in the playoffs. I think the Saints are still the better team between those two and would win the division. But to think about that, let's just say New Orleans and Seattle win the divisions. If you've got the defending NFC champs and Tom Brady on the road in wild card games, I mean, that's going to be wild as the 5-6 seeds. I mean, this is going to be interesting. But the other thing I do want to get to is that NFC North before we wrap up this preview, because I've heard so many people about the Green Bay Packers that they're going to take this wicked step back this year and they're going to be complacent in the NFC North. And this is the end of Aaron Rodgers. They did make the NFC Championship last year. I know they got killed by San Francisco in that game, but they're still a very solid team. You've still got Devontae Adams. You've got a solid running game, solid defense, and Aaron Rodgers is still a good quarterback. He's still one of the top quarterbacks in the NFL. Jordan Love is not just replacing Aaron Rodgers out of the blue this season. He's there. I think that was an interesting move that the Packers made, and it kind of parallels when they drafted Rodgers when Brett Favre was on the back burner of his career. But I don't think it's not like Jordan Love is just going to, Aaron Rodgers starts the year 1 and 2 and Jordan Love takes over week 4. That's not happening. And the Packers, I think, are still all around the best team of the 4 in the NFC North. With the Vikings, I think they're a close second. Kirk Cousins has started to prove himself last year, starting to do better in big games. We saw it in the playoffs against New Orleans last year. I think Kirk Cousins and those Vikings losing Stephon Diggs, though, is going to hurt them. For the Bears, it's going to be interesting to see the quarterback competition between Trubisky and Nick Foles. But still, I don't see them being much more than maybe a 500 team. And then Detroit, I mean, Matthew Stafford's still there. I mean, I don't have much faith in that man at all. And I don't know. I don't really understand their whole strategy because they did draft Jeff Okudah early on in the draft, and they got rid of Darius Slay. So it was just replacing one of, if not their best defensive player, with just a younger version of that player. I feel like they should have instead focused on building up other portions of that team, because there's a lot of weak spots on that Detroit team that they really have to work on. But I do not see Green Bay taking this crazy dramatic step back this year. How about you?
Well, and I don't see Green Bay falling back quite either. When I think about teams as well, as I mentioned the 49ers, for example, that don't make too many changes in terms of how their season approach is, they tend to fall back. But it's interesting because you don't tend to see this with Aaron Rodgers teams. I mean, think about it. All the years with Mike McCarthy, how similar were those teams from season to season to season to season, and they were always consistent. Now, don't get me wrong, they didn't go to the Super Bowl every year, but they were always consistently winning games. But I think the make or break for the Packers season this year, Eddie, is simply the fact of this. If Aaron Rodgers doesn't get hurt the first 8 weeks, they're going to the playoffs. They're going to be the team that leads the NFC North. Now, I'm not going to sit here and say the Bears' defense isn't scary, because their defense is really scary. Any team that has Khalil Mack on it scares me. But, again, Mitchell Trubisky is an underwhelming quarterback. He's good one week, and then he's the worst quarterback you've ever seen the other week. Nick Foles is a terrible starting quarterback until he needs to come up in the clutch. It's almost like if you're the Bears, if you make the playoffs, bench Mitchell Trubisky, have Nick Foles play just the playoffs. And maybe you'll win a Super Bowl if you're a Bears fan. The Lions, you have nothing to look forward to. I'm just being honest. Fire Matt Patricia at the end of the year. You'll be doing yourself a favor, because that team is going nowhere fast. And that's no dig at Matt Stafford. I think Matt Stafford's a very underrated quarterback. He's going to throw for 5,000 yards this year if healthy. And it's another year for Stafford where he plays great football and no one gives a hack up there in Detroit, because they're one of the worst football teams and franchises you ever see in sports. And then mention one last team in that NFC, and that's the Minnesota Vikings. I have no idea what to expect. You lose Stephon Diggs. You have Adam Thielen, but he's aging. I don't really trust still Adam Thielen as the number one target. Don't get me wrong. He is a superstar wide receiver. There is no doubting that. But Adam Thielen as a number one guy, I just don't know. Remember, he was the number 2 behind Diggs. It's just, I don't know. Kirk Cousins needs to have confidence throwing the football. He proved last year he could come in the clutch for one game. But it all depends. Is Dalvin Cook going to have to take the load? That defense is always going to be good. But I just don't know. I don't really dig the Vikings. Not even when Case Keenum was their quarterback and they made a good run did I dig the Minnesota Vikings. Usually defense does win championships, don't get me wrong, but I just don't feel a good Vikings year this year. Not to say that they're not going to go above 500. I think they're going to be well above 500. It's just a matter of, I think this year in particular, Eddie, to be honest, you have to win at least 10 games to make the playoffs this year as a wild card team. It's just one of those years where I think the NFC in particular has a bunch of really good teams, something that we haven't seen in a while compared to what the AFC tends to have. But a lot of good teams that are going to have to win at least 9-10 football games to make a wild card spot minimum.
Yeah, I mean, there's no one team in the NFC that's really just going to overpower the rest of the conference. And it's interesting to mention you talked about Nick Foles. And I kind of compare him to like a bullpen pitcher. Like, you can only use him in small spurts, and it feels like he's only effective for a certain period of time. And I'm sorry, he's only been effective in an Eagles uniform. His time with the Rams was not good. His time before the injury with Jacksonville, it was very short, but it was not good, and they soured on him very quickly. He might be a step up from Mitchell Trubisky, but I really think that the only team he really feels comfortable playing in that market is Philadelphia. We know how liked he is by the fan base there, and we've seen that, I mean, in sports for years, where there's certain players that can only play in certain media markets, depending on the pressure of the situation sometimes, just, their hometown, how the fans treat them. And I feel like Nick Foles can only be effective in that way, or as you said, as a clutch player that comes in the playoffs. But Mitchell Trubisky is not getting the Chicago Bears to the playoffs at all. And then with Minnesota, they did build up that defense. They drafted a lot of young defensive players this past April, but You mentioned Adam Thielen, and he's a good receiver. He makes some big plays. He'll make the big splash and surprise you. And he's very nice to have in a fantasy football league. But I mean, he's still inconsistent at times, and I don't know if he can be that number one receiver. So I think the South and the West, comparatively speaking, are much stronger than the North and the East this year. But it's going to be interesting to see what happens for sure in the NFC as well as the AFC this season in the NFL. And as the season approaches, me and you will do our full preview and picks as to who will make the playoffs and who will make the Super Bowl. But I want to move on to something closer. I mean, it's July. The MLB and NBA both scheduled to start soon. The hockey, they're still trying to piece it together. They've announced Edmonton and Toronto as the two target cities as hosts. But we have seen more and more players in the NBA and in the MLB testing positive for coronavirus as well as opting out. We mentioned back on Monday the first few opt-outs for baseball. We had heard from Ryan Zimmerman, Ian Desmond, Joe Ross. Those were a few of the names we heard the other day. And then the NBA, there's been rumors about Bradley Beal. And then now the Brooklyn Nets are going to be so depleted. DeAndre Jordan testing positive. He won't be there. Spencer Dinwiddie wants to be there, but he tested positive as well. They don't know if he'll be there. Wilson Chandler is hurt. No Kyrie, no KD. I mean, the Nets are going to be so empty, and I don't think they're going to be the only team. And we're seeing other guys getting signed. Just yesterday, Luke Mbah Mute got signed by the Rockets to replace Thabo Cephalosha, who's not going to play. So, I mean, there's so many situations where we're seeing players opting out. And I think, Tim, this trend is going to continue as we approach the start of the projected MLB season and NBA restart.
Yeah, not to be a heavy downer, in terms of sports, but this goes back to what I said, Eddie. I think sports should have been canceled for 2020, if I'm just being honest, because you're now having the NBA players get ready to go down to Orlando, and they're getting back into their practice facilities at home and starting to get back together, and you're seeing COVID start to ramp up. Ryan Zimmerman on the MLB side, give him a lot of credit, especially for him as a high-caliber baseball player, to turn around and say, I don't want to play baseball because of COVID. I just had a new baby boy. I need to stand up and make a difference. And he's doing a good job. But, on the NBA side, I don't really know, if you're the Nets in particular, what you do in this situation. Do you sign G League players? Do you sign a couple of veterans? Because, to be honest, every player at this point is in risk. I'm really nervous to see as well, Eddie, and we'll talk about this more, I'm sure, later. Tomorrow's Friday. Believe it or not, summer camp for baseball starts tomorrow. Mm-hmm. I'm scared to see how many players go to their, facilities for their spring training facilities and how many people come with COVID. And I'm scared to see the numbers go up because obviously they're all only sport right now, but we haven't seen the numbers go up yet. So, I mean, again, I'm really nervous to see. I don't see here in the NBA this really working out in regards to this season. They should have just played the playoffs, and that's it. Bring your 16 teams that were in a position. I get, hey, it's great for TV to try to get Zion Williamson in the playoffs, but what are you doing, NBA? You're risking people's lives for money. That's it. That's all they're trying to do. Please the TV contracts and make money. It's not getting anything done. Whoever wins the NBA championship this year, there's going to be an asterisk on it anyways, if you really think about it. And I'm really, to be honest, again, I'm still personally hoping it's the Lakers that win the NBA championship. People have other opinions because you like that LA rivalry there is right now. But with everything with Kobe Bryant and the thing going on, I'm not going to undermine that. I think that's a huge story, to bring the title back to LA for Kobe. But when it's all said and done, you just want these players to be healthy. And I just don't think it's going to happen.
I still think the NBA will happen with this. I agree it should have just been the 16 teams. But, when you've got Zion, you got the Spurs, you got, still with a mathematical chance to make the playoffs, they just want to get them involved. So, but I really think they should have done that. I still think we're going to see the NBA happen. And I think this can thrive at the bubble because, frankly, this is the safest way to do the playoffs in one area. But the players who are playing, they have to know to be concerned about this and to be careful during this period. But there's a lot of people who are just not going to want to spend 2 months in Orlando We've seen even Bradley Beal rumor about not wanting to play. And now we're starting to see people who are not giving a specific reason. Fabo Cephalosha was the first one, that it's not just the pandemic. It's not just social injustice. It's just the whole prospect of spending 2.5 months in Disney World in a dangerous situation with everything else going on, everything compounding together. So I think we're going to see more NBA players dropping out, but I do think we will see this NBA thing happen. And I think for the players that are passionate, and obviously for the fans, this is going to be fun to watch. And I think it's the safest way to do this. On the other hand, for baseball, I just don't know what to say about this, because I really think having a bubble, having an area, every other tournament we're hearing about, the NBA, the MLS, WNBA, NHL, it's all in one concentrated area. I don't see how baseball is going to feasibly do this for 2.5 months with teams flying around. And I know you're just playing local teams, but still, let's just think about, I mean, we're from the New York area. Think about the Mets and Yankees. They're going to be flying to Toronto, flying to Florida. I mean, they're flying to Atlanta. There's still reasonable travel involved here. So I really think, personally, the only way baseball could feasibly work with this, I think, is if you had, you've already separated into the 3 groups of 10 teams, 3 bubbles per se for those teams. And then if things are okay and you're able to do at least a little bit of travel, choose one of those neutral sites and bring the playoff teams over there. And that's the only travel you have to do the whole time. I think that's the best way to do this. You know, there's baseball players who want to play. You know, baseball compared to the other 3 major sports is probably the lowest risk, because you're not really sweating on each other. There's not much contact in this sport of baseball. I mean, it's the safest in that respect out of the 4 sports. It's also outdoors, which gives it the legs up over basketball or hockey. But I don't see how you can feasibly do this with traveling. It's too dangerous at this point, with guys flying all around and we don't know, because these cases are still going up. Every state except for New Jersey or Rhode Island, the number of cases per day is either staying the same or going up. It's only 2 states out of the 50 that are going down right now. So I really think we want sports, and I know you've mentioned about how in the long run, maybe it would be better to cancel sports this year. And I mean, I can see that argument, but I think if you want to do this safely, the bubble method is the best way to do this. The NBA has figured out a nice strategy, and the majority of the players do want to play. And I think baseball can do the same thing. They have divided this already into those 3 groups of 10. Just have 3 bubbles and then 1 neutral place you send the playoff teams. And that's only 1 bit of traveling for the entire 3 months. And I think that's the best way you could do this. But right now, I don't see how you can be using 30 ballparks, especially in these states where you have these major outbreaks that are even more like Florida and Texas right now, and California as well, are even worse than the worst of the worst that we saw here in New Jersey and New York back in April.
Well, I do want to start with your point that you mentioned about the NBA. You know, sending people to Orlando and Disney. I do want to say this, Eddie. You have to remember one thing. You know, when you're bringing these guys all together into one place, you're telling them now that they have to stay sheltered and have no live for the next 2 months. And let's be honest, as a human, you don't want to be trapped inside your house doing nothing.
Mm-hmm.
And let's be honest, these NBA players, they're not going to deal with that. They want to have their regular lives. This is why I don't think this is going to work out. For example, baseball, and I think I gave this comparison a few months ago. You're going to tell teams, let's say that have more homestands, right? You're going to tell 2 teams that you have to stay inside a ballpark, live inside the clubhouse together, and don't travel, don't go and talk to other people, and live together every single day. You can't see your families for the next 6 months. You can't, go out shopping. You can't do anything. You have to stay in one remote location. It's not going to work. It's just simply not going to work. No human wants that. It's almost like being in prison. And the realism is that that's the only way you can try to prevent COVID. But the realism is that itself may not even prevent it. That's the mystery about COVID-19. You may have a worker that comes in from the outside and catches it and gives it to all the players. So there's no exact answer. You can only try to minimize it. But the realism is the only way if you minimize it is if you keep them away from real life society and make sure they're trapped in and they can't escape. But it's not going to happen. It's just simply not going to happen because no player is going to agree to that. So, don't get me wrong. These players want to play. They're going to do anything they can to play. But I just don't know. And you mentioned the MLB situation. I think it's insane traveling to ballparks, having a regular schedule for 60 games. Traveling is the worst aspect of COVID. And I know they have their own private jets. I know they have all of that. But it's the worst aspect overall. It's the easiest way to catch an airborne virus, especially. So you've got to be careful with that. I feel that the MLB missed. Cut it down. Let's say, I know you have Western teams, and I get that. But why couldn't they cut down to 15 ballparks? Why couldn't you maybe utilize some minor league parks since the minor league season's canceled? There's availability now with everything going on for access like this. And I think the MLB missed on a huge opportunity because of that, Eddie.
And I still think things like that could happen. We're still 3 weeks till this thing gets started. And think about it. California, I cannot feasibly see baseball going on in California right now. I can't see it in Texas. I can't see it in Florida unless we had some sort of bubble situation. And even still, at this point, I know the NBA has their bubble right now in Orlando, but I think you got to go to a place where the cases are at the very least, remaining steady. You're not having this major outbreak because we're seeing this in various states where people are not wearing masks, where people are not social distancing. And it's been proven. And there's many different cases. We don't need to get into a whole political discussion about it, but there's a lot of different reasons that people are doing this. And we're seeing this all across the country in different states right now. But fact of the matter is, at least for now, baseball and basketball scheduled to start. We've seen players begin to opt out, and I think that trend will continue. But we do have some sports that are being very careful and are not, it's not as big of a production to get things started, and it's a lot safer that we're going to see in action 4th of July weekend. I was looking at some of the sports that are in action this weekend, and you know what? We've got a decent amount of selection. So starting today, we've got the Rocket Mortgage Classic for golf, their 4th tournament back. It's in Detroit, and that just got started today. Of course, that runs through Sunday. Formula One is back. They're racing this weekend. Indianapolis Motor Speedway, not the Indy 500 yet. That with the 50% fans, which I think is the biggest mistake ever, will be coming next month. We'll probably talk about that more in upcoming shows. But for now, Indianapolis is doing the right thing and hosting something without fans. And it's going to be the first ever NASCAR IndyCar crossover. IndyCars in the Xfinity Series for NASCAR will be using the road course at Indianapolis, while the Cup cars will be running the Brickyard 400 on Sunday. Also Saturday, even given the circumstances, the Nathan's Hot Dog Eating Contest is happening this year without fans. It's going to be interesting to see how that works out because you know what? Depending on where this thing is, people might still want to come and watch this. But Joey,
I was just about to ask, has Joey Chestnut retired yet? That's all I've heard for the last 3 years is he's going to retire, and yet he's still doing this thing every single year.
He has not. So I think he's just going to keep going and going, eating 70 hot dogs in 10 minutes. I still don't understand how that is even, and with your anatomy, even possible. But the fact of the matter is that's an entertaining 10 minutes to watch every 4th of July. Cornhole has been in action as well, and their big U.S. Open Championship, which is on the 4th of July, will be on ESPN that day right after that. And also, Korean baseball has been going on. MLS is coming back next week. The Women's Soccer League got started. They started their playing tournament. Major League Lacrosse is now starting in a week and a half. So, we do have sports that are going. And for the most part, these sports are doing it safely. And you think about the sports that I just mentioned, auto racing, golf, cornhole. These are things where you can social distance easily. And I know we've seen a couple golfers get the coronavirus, but other than that, like for example, with auto racing, at least for now, NASCAR's been in action for 6 weeks, and aside from a couple guys at the shop, obviously NASCAR has been making a lot of other headlines, but coronavirus has not been a problem for the sport. Obviously, the guys are socially distanced on their own in the cars. They have not had issues with the pit crews picking it up, which was a concern I had, but fingers crossed that continues. We have not seen that problem. But Tim, I mean, there's a lot of sports that people can still enjoy watching 4th of July weekend. I know it doesn't feel natural right now because you'd expect to see like baseball going on or Wimbledon going on during this time, but there's still competition to watch, and many of these competitions are being done in a safe way, and kudos to these leagues that are able to do this.
Yeah, when you look at July 4th, I always used to have that kind of feeling about Daytona. I was excited for Daytona. I used to go to the Daytona races for July for the Coke Zero 400, or back when it was in the Pepsi 400, many years ago, and I was so excited for it. This year, to be honest, I know we're seeing, the double in regards to the mixing of sports for the Indianapolis road course and the main track itself, but I still just can't fathom and put together the fact that NASCAR is going to Indy for 4th of July and that Daytona is the cutoff race. I still can't put it together. Now, don't get me wrong. I can't wait for Daytona to be the cutoff race because that race will be pandemonium. That will draw viewership. There's no denying that. But I just still can't think, man, Indianapolis in July compared to August, it just doesn't add up right to me. But, I'm real excited to see this road course race. This is the first time ever the Xfinity cars and a NASCAR stock car is going around this track. And you have to remember what happened with the Roval the first time they went through. It was pandemonium. I can only imagine it's going to be a great finish. Now, the difference is at least this racetrack in terms of the road course existed in the past. And they have an idea of how to drive the track. But with the Roval, it was literally created off an idea and no one knew what to expect. So I'm real excited, though, to see how this goes, and I'm excited how both races really go. On golf, I'm excited to see. Do you know if Dustin Johnson's in this event? I know he won last week.
Yes, he's in this
again this week, and I think he's going to be my favorite again. It's almost feels like once you start getting towards summertime in golf, you have to place your Vegas bets on Dustin Johnson. He just seems to come clutch in many ways, and I'm excited to see. I think he has a real bright future as a golfer. And there's a bunch of other things. I do have a funny story as well. Has nothing to do with American football, actually Australian Football League. I was watching Pat McAfee the other day. There was a player, and I forget his name, but he has probably one of the best names I've ever seen in all sports. And to get an idea of how crazy this COVID thing is as well, in Australia, they're very strict about the policies. They lost to one of the worst teams in the football league. And I guess he went to a bar after a game and got a little bit hammered. He got a 4-game suspension for taking an Uber home and breaking policies for social distancing. Seriously, making the right decision to stay safe, taking an Uber home so he wasn't drinking and driving, ended up giving him a 4-game suspension. Isn't that insane to you? A 4-game suspension for making the right decision and being safe?
I know, but you know what? The right decision there would have been to not go to the bar at all in the long run. But you know what? I mean, you want to celebrate, but this is just the world we live in now. And apparently now taking an Uber gets you a 4-game suspension in Australian football. But I mean, this is the strictness that we're seeing throughout. And we talked about this a couple of shows ago, how the NBA has a very strict protocol. The MLB sent out a 137-page protocol to the teams, including rules against spitting and high-fiving and very specific rules about that. Let me mention that too. But, I mean, this is something that's going to be continuing at least for the next few months. But the good thing to say is that there is some sports action to watch this 4th of July weekend. If you're not into auto racing, I highly suggest checking out this NASCAR IndyCar crossover, especially that Xfinity race on a road course that they've never driven on before, which means it's going to be chaotic.
Did you see the All-Star race format? I'm really excited to see that at Bristol. And by the way, I did find a player's name, Steel Sidebottom, one of the best names I've ever seen in all sports. I think that's an awesome name. But, I'm real excited, too, with this All-Star race coming up. I have no idea what to expect at Bristol. And I really hope they make some changes and invert the field, towards the third segment. The fourth segment's only 15 laps. That's going to create some havoc, but that's going to be a really good race. But here this weekend, you're going to see some awesome racing. I mean, the Brickyard, to be honest, for the Cup side tends to be a little bit boring towards the middle version of the race because it's a very long race, 50 seconds a lap tends to add up over time, but the endings are always great. And, seeing someone kiss the bricks is awesome. I wonder, though, do you carry that tradition for Xfinity? Because do you really kiss the bricks at the road course? Because it's a different style. I mean, don't get me wrong, you cross the bricks regardless, but it's a different track. I wonder what kind of tradition they kind of follow with that.
Yeah, and you know what? If you're talking about kissing the bricks, I wonder, first of all, do you know if in the IndyCar road course race, do they kiss the bricks in that, or is that just for the Indy 500?
Well, that's what I was just about to ask you. I'm not quite sure. I thought it was only for the Indy 500 in terms for IndyCar, but I don't know if they kiss the bricks at the road course. I'll have to take a look into that. But that's the reason why I was asking, because what kind of tradition do you do then? Obviously, when you think IndyCar tradition of the Indy 500, it's kiss the bricks and have, the big glass of milk while you're up there on the podium. NASCAR doesn't do the milk aspect. They just kiss the bricks. But, it's the burnouts and stuff that's different from IndyCar when it's all said and done. But, I'm really excited, not because I'm a NASCAR fan, but this is going to be an incredible weekend. First time ever as well. You never see IndyCar and NASCAR in the same place. So big kudos to Roger Penske. Now, don't get me wrong, down the road with the Indianapolis event and the Indy 500, I think that's a terrible idea. But we'll talk about that later. But big kudos getting two of the major sports together. I think that's huge. And I really think that's going to be the sport to watch this weekend.
Yeah, and I think there's going to be a lot of drama with the bricks. If you remember last year, or it was either last year or the year before that, where IndyCar fans were in an uproar because in the Xfinity race, Justin Allgaier had done his burnouts over the bricks and left, oh no, dreaded tire tracks over those sacred bricks. And then how about if you do kiss the bricks for the road course, is there going to be specific brick kissing rules given the pandemic? Well, they're kissing through a mask where you have to disinfect the bricks afterwards. So we're going to have to see what the whole situation is with that. But like Tim said, that is going to be an event to watch. Hot dog eating contest this weekend as well. We've got golf. We've got cornhole. Formula One is back. We've got some things going on. And hopefully the major sports will be able to make their return later in the month while maintaining proper social distancing and other safety measures. But that's going to about wrap things up today. Next week, I will not be here. I will be going to the Bruce Beck Sports Broadcasting Camp over Zoom. It should be a fun experience. Tim and I actually did a show last year about NASCAR on that in that camp. Tim won't be attending the camp this year, but he will be trying to keep Sports Speak going at least for one episode next week. So maybe two. So we'll keep you posted. I'm also going to be setting up a Twitter for Sports Speak. So I'll put it in the description or in the comments once I set that up what the handle is, so you can keep updated on the show. But until then, I'll be back on Monday, July, let me see, that would be the 13th would be the next time I'll be here. Tim, and maybe we'll have another co-host on with him then, so just keep an eye out for that. But until then, I'm Eddie Kalegi.
And I'm Tim Moore.
And we'll see you next time. This is Sports Speak.